From the studios of KCRW in Santa Monica and Museum of Television and Radio in New York, it's The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. My guest, who has been eluding us for 4 years or so, has come back with his new movie, Storytelling, is Todd Solondz. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I've got to ask you, because whenever I see one of your pictures, I always think of the 2,000-year-old man bit, the Mel Brooks thing, where he says, tragedy is when I prick my finger, comedy is when you fall in the sewer and die. Somehow, that seems, your definition of comedy seems to be close to that.
Well, I try not to. I don't even know how I would begin to define these things. There are people much more qualified than me. You know, going back, I don't know, to all the Greeks and so forth. So I don't know that I have much to illuminate on that front, so to start defining comedy. But certainly, the way it's used. I mean, half the time when I show my movies, people aren't even aware they're comedies. So it's a little bit more fluid, I think. My understanding of it. I just know that if something, if I find something funny, often because it in some sense moves me, and it's hard to articulate exactly what it is that makes me respond in this way, though.
Would you say, though, in your definition, that there's a certain amount of aggression in comedy?
Well, I suppose you could look at that in sort of, I guess that's a Freudian sort of way of looking at things. A certain amount of hostility. Well, I suppose anger certainly fuels, to a certain extent, a lot of what I do. I don't see that as either a good or a bad thing, but I certainly think that would be a fair assessment.
It's funny, though, because when you said that as a good or bad thing, it seems that the thing that disturbs people most about your movies is that you don't build a judgment in. You don't judge the characters, and that sort of doesn't it seems to sort of confuse people as if they're comedies or not.
Well, for the record, I have said that they are comedies, terribly sad or painful, sorrowful comedies, but emphatically comedies. With the issue regarding the issue of judgment, it's always very tricky because there is certainly a kind of moral censor to what I do here, but I don't make these things explicit with signposts telling people, dictating how to feel, what to think, when to laugh, when not to, and so forth. And so it sometimes can be a little bit tricky for I think, people to get their bearings. But this is what I find compelling for me about the process of filmmaking. It's all fraught with ambiguity, and nothing is quite exactly what it seems. That's the intent, at least, and so. As far as judgments, I mean, in the sense of making, because it's a tricky term, because of course, in one sense, I do have certain strong feelings that I think do come across in what I do in my work, though it may often be somehow oddly misinterpreted, and yet at the same time, I need to create a kind of freedom to explore this world, characters and so forth, in a way that doesn't fix the response of the audience and forces one to ideally evaluate and then reevaluate one's perception of not only what's going on screen, but the way in which one sees oneself in the world at large. I mean, that's the sort of ambitious goal. But for me, the most ambitious really is just to keep the audience in their seats somewhat engaged for 90 minutes or so.
Well, I guess I meant, though, by that judgment is that you don't really tell the audience how to react to the characters, which can make the movies, I mean, they don't seem ambiguous in that respect to me, because you sort of build it on the sort of the chemistry and the interaction of the characters, rather than saying this person is good and this person is not.
Well, yes, I don't have heroes and villains, and it's their flaws and so forth that make them make me have the affection that I have for them and the interest that I have in them. But I do think we have to take on a case by case basis. When I talk about ambiguity, I'm talking about if I take a scene, for example. with a filmmaker, a documentarian who's shooting a film about a family. To what extent is this an honorable? Are his intentions honorable? To what extent are they misguided? To what extent are they inevitably going to result in a kind of exploitation?
But you also have the family submitting to this exploitation because many Americans almost feel that at some point they have the right to be on television, or at least to be on camera.
Well, I don't know that it's a right. It may be a punishment as well, but I don't know that it's written constitutionally anywhere that it's your God-given right to be on TV, and I'm not sure. And it's certainly not clear that it's really a privilege. It's a question of how and which, what one's expectations are, and how one is used or abused, and in this situation. Or you, of course, have the teacher-student situation in the first part of the movie, which is, to my mind, fraught with a great deal of ambiguity. Oftentimes, people will look at it as a kind of a wolf and a lamb scenario. But I think the motives are all very mixed and a little bit more difficult to pin down than to say the student was a victim of a nefarious or sinister teacher's predatory impulses. Certainly, she has very mixed motives, and certainly the teacher is on to her. And if someone's going to be used, he certainly doesn't want to be the person being used.
Well, I guess as you talk about this, but having watched the movies again last night, your pictures seem to be about shifts in power and the reactions to, and this sort of subtle sort of grasping for power in all these personal relationships.
Well, one thing that's true which is that it's hard to pin me down vis-a-vis my characters. That is to say, oftentimes people might connect me with the documentarian filmmaker and say, "Oh, that's a kind of alter ego." But to some extent, that may be fair, but it's also very misleading because I don't have any one-to-one connection with any one of my characters. My sympathies are always shifting. I may share some of the concerns that Toby, the documentarian, has with his film project, but at the same time, I am very sympathetic. I'm very much with John Goodman when he's yelling at him. You had a bad time in college? Well, get over it. Don't impose your miseries on others, and so forth. So I'm kind of straddling a fence here, and that allows a kind of, I suppose, critiquing to take place.
But the reason I asked that question, though, because it seems to be something sort of very territorial. And as you were talking about the relationship between Toby and the family and Selma Blair in the first part of the storytelling, I'm thinking back to Heather and Welcome to the Dollhouse. It's also about these characters trying to stake a certain kind of emotional territory and hold that. And that seems to be where the shifting sympathies come into play.
Well, the thing is that I have a kind of aversion to any sort of victim cinema or victim literature in which the scenario of someone who has been who is just being assaulted by a terribly unfair social order struggles to assert her or his dignity. It's not interesting enough to me. What I need is to recognize the fact that there is the persecuted and the persecutor both residing within each of us. It's too comforting to say that one is just a victim, and it's too sentimental. I think my movies I think are difficult in the sense that I don't. I suppose I want to rattle a certain level of complacency about ourselves. It's not the cruelty that is out there is not just out there, but it's in here too. That just as we have that capacity for kindness, we have an equal capacity for cruelty. The best of us learn how to repress these baser instincts or sublimate them into more positive impulses. But I think it's only one's actual context that enables us, in fact, to pretend to ourselves that we perhaps are as wonderful as we like to imagine. If you watch enough television and read the right a lot of the right kinds of papers and books and so forth, they're out to tell us how wonderful we are. And while it's true that we can be quite wonderful, it's hard to, of course, not recognize that we're equally horrible.
I guess, okay, so I asked the question because with Selma in the first part in fiction, she has to some extent control over her boyfriend, but not control with the teacher. And that seems to be, maybe I'm misreading or reading something.
No, there's no misreading here that's going on. But you have to understand that the process of writing for me is not quite as intellectual as it might seem now after the fact. That is to say, it's a creative process. It's one in which there is a process of discovery that takes place. And so there are all sorts of readings that one can discover that one may not be aware of when one sets about writing something. When you're writing it, you're thinking of story and character and so forth, and at the end of the process, you say, oh, it's really about this. I thought it was about that, or I thought it was focusing more. It takes time, and then you film it, and then you cut it, and it takes on different shapes from what you had initially imagined to a large degree. At least this is my experience. So while it may not be my conscious focus, what you're talking about, that doesn't mean it's not present. It just means that's not the way I have been looking at this work.
How did you look at it when you first started to sort of outline and write it?
Well, I never really outline these things. As I said, I just write it. You just have to get to that point where you say you will sit down and actually write it. How
long did it take you to do that? Actually sit down and write it?
Well, the writing itself doesn't take, 6 weeks or something.
But actually sitting down to write it.
To get to the once you're writing, and then you're okay. Then you're sort of home free. But it's to get to that point where you actually sit down. But this is some people are able to get up and write 4, 6, 8 hours. I don't know how many hours a day, but I don't work this way. I never have. I've been writing since I'm a kid, and it's very sporadic, and it comes and goes in waves. And
so you don't set aside a certain amount of time every day to write?
I can do that, but it won't be really very productive. I don't really. You have to. There is a certain amount of discipline, but you also have to recognize your own idiosyncrasies and respect them, and so that they can work for you.
We'll be right back with Todd Solondz. Is the treatment.
KCRW supporters include the Los Angeles Film School, where intensive training programs start every 2 months and include state-of-the-art production and post-production using the latest equipment. 323-860-0789 or lafilm.com.
We're back. Todd Solondz, whose new movie is Storytelling, is with us. It's the treatment. I guess what's so much fun for me, though, is just maybe getting a chance to sort of watch these movies and sort of chart my reactions to how different they are. I mean, when you were first here with Welcome to the Dollhouse, it seems actually a lot broader comedy to me now than it did then for some reason. And what's it like for you when you say, or do you get a chance to watch them again yourself?
Well, I don't really spend much time looking back at my own work. I finish it and try to move on. But in part, it may seem somewhat. It's possible. It's a broader film and certainly a more commercially accessible film as well. I think that there's not to give that a plus or a minus there, but I think. If as an audience, if you've seen that film and then if you've seen Happiness, that the experience of having seen these movies adjusts you, helps you adapt to yet the next film that you might see of mine, so that you're not just seeing it in a void. There is certainly a context, and it's a context of the work itself. That doesn't mean that one has to have seen the other films in order to get what I'm doing here, but it certainly will have an effect.
But I just wonder, for you, you're talking about wanting to sort of disrupt that complacency. If you feel like you've got maybe something to surmount with the audience having expectations about your work from the other two pictures.
Well, one always, as at least as a writer, filmmaker, what have you, you in a certain sense, you never want to give them what they want. That is to say, then it would have no interest for you because you've already done that. If you wanted to just do a sequel, just more of the same, I suppose you could do that, but then it would have no interest for me as a filmmaker. You always try to get someplace somewhere else. You try to mine things from a different angle, an angle perhaps that people aren't expecting or not really wanting necessarily for you to explore. But this is how you ideally you grow as a filmmaker. You try things out, and if you're not doing that, it's kind of a death sentence.
I guess I just find we talked a little bit about this the last time you were here too, because there's been such an institutionalization of bad taste. I mean, it's sort of welcome. There are expectations in a certain kind of movie. Do you feel that you have to try to yourself to sort of lay claim to a kind of territory that's not being mined in other kind of movies?
Well, I think with everything I do, I always try to get at things that I haven't seen before, to get at things from an angle that seems fresh to me. It's not a question of bad taste. I don't really see my movies as in bad taste. They may not be to everyone's taste, but that's a different thing. And taste, of course, is a very hard thing to pinpoint, what's good and what's not. And varies from city to city and so forth. But I think that one always is trying to push oneself to. I don't mean in pushing the envelope for the sake of pushing the envelope, but I mean you push it metaphorically, artistically, so that you try to get at things that you haven't quite seen. This is the first time that I dealt with the issue of race. I'd never dealt with it before, and it's hard to imagine taking oneself seriously and being an American and not wanting to, in some sense, deal with the subject of race. So you come at things in a way that you feel that you try to be not quite so polite and get at things in a way that expose certain truths or realities, or force us at least to question them in ways that perhaps we haven't had to do.
It's funny because the kind of cinema you do, which is more or less called independent cinema, actually doesn't deal with race to a great extent, and actually sort of combining sort of race and academia was a real. I was really turned on by it. I thought it was really kind of wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, well, it's you see, it's not. I'm not hardly in any new terrain. It's out there. It's a question of.
But it's not been dramatized for
right.
a while.
Exactly. It's a question of recognizing things that are out there and bringing it and lassoing it in. And recognizing that the dramatic possibilities inherent in that, and how that can be revelatory.
See, I guess I was amused by the movie too, because we're at a point now where you are influencing a generation of filmmakers, and by virtue of that, having your influence on the mainstream. So seeing you sort of examine a little bit of a movie, I think, that sort of tried to steal from you American Beauty, was really kind of intensely satisfying for me.
Well, I try to be very respectful of my peers and so forth, and it's only what happened is a couple of years ago I was interviewed by someone who had just interviewed Mr. Mendes, who was describing happiness as somewhat condescending to its characters. And so I just felt I had carte blanche to pay my own homage to Mr. Mendes, and since it fit within the context of things, there you have it. I certainly don't. I've never met the gentleman. There's no enmity really. But I am not, as I may have said before. I mean that movie certainly was the great feel-good movie of not only the year but of our time, and
but
feel
it was also
good in the sense of course, in a very narcissistic sense of course, in making us feel good about who we are, in ways that appeal to a certain kind of sentimentality, a certain kind of self-deception about what we value about ourselves.
Because watching it, it felt to me like a movie star mainstream version of what you do, except by building a certain kind of judgment about the character, so you know who's good and who's not, so you know exactly how you're supposed to feel at the end. It's a movie that really doesn't ask any questions of the audience.
Well, I'm not here certainly to attack this film. I don't have much interest really in doing that. But I can only say that certainly, I mean, look, self-deception, it is a survival mechanism. It's something that we all practice, but a conscious acknowledging that I myself am guilty, like anyone else, of practicing a certain amount of self-deception. As a filmmaker, I try to expose these deceptions and to reveal, in fact, some of the truthfulness of not just for the sake of showing some dirty truths or some base truths, but a fuller sense of the moral. The moral spectrum of what we're capable of and what we really are about.
Do you still go to the movies very often?
I go all the time. I try to. I like going to the movies. I don't rent. I just I never rent movies for pleasure. I like to be in a big dark room with even if nobody's there. I mean, I like seeing it projected. That's film, and so I don't get any pleasure for TV. It has to be more functional, or it has to be really bad, one or the other. I can't really respond well to what is called quality television.
What do you mean by functional television?
Well, you have to spot. You have to certain news reports, certain things that are going on that are being, whether it's on just to see certain facts, things that are going on, and how they're being reported, and how they're being disseminated, how that information is coming across. It's important just to be aware of these things, so that one can be reminded of the smallness of one's life.
How much more comfortable do you feel now with the camera, because your mastery, your command of the medium, the movie feels a lot more seamless to me, I guess, storytelling than did, obviously, Welcome to the Dollhouse, but it feels really sort of very calm to me.
Well, I did have a wonderful cinematographer, Fred Elms, shoot this film, and this is ultimately you get better by just doing more movies. With most filmmakers, if you notice, you just compare the early Coen brother movies to what they're doing now, which is just magnificently, just awe-inspiringly beautiful, the work that you see there. And I think it's a question of time, and the more you do it, just the better you get at it, like anything else.
But I'm even noticing in terms of the shifts in tone, and I think I perceive to be a difference in looks between the two segments. In storytelling, I get that more. Yeah.
Well, it was everything. I mean, everything is deliberate. And on another level, it's all an accident. You plan everything out as best you can, but it never works out quite the way you intended. And I spoke about this, of course, in my writing, but it as well, of course, even much more so there on the set.
Are you more obviously open to the accidents now than you were before, or
open to the
accidents as they take place?
Well, you have no choice but to accept the fact that you have that's no control the way you had as a writer. That one of the realities of being a director is accepting that you don't have absolute control, and that compromise is what it's all about. And it's a question of always knowing which battles are worth fighting. and making those calls as fast as you can, because time and money are constantly assaulting you in ways that you don't have to think about as a writer.
I guess I'm wondering, too, do you feel that the movies become a bit more improvisatory for you, or do you hold to the script now?
I'm pretty tight with the script. There may be certain bits that I might ask an actor to improvise a small bit of dialogue here or there, but they're pretty much strictly mapped out.
And how much rehearsal time do you get with the actors? How much do you work with them before you start shooting?
Well, you have an audition. That's what I call the rehearsal. Well, and then a few months later, you see them on set. So
you don't really rehearse that?
No, I mean the fact is you don't really have the budget for it at this level. But even if I did, what would I do with these? If I had an actor for 2 weeks, I'm afraid they would just learn how little I know. And they'd be on to me, and this way they can be daunted and impressed by my appearing like I know what I'm doing, and they'll just listen to me more. That's the psychology at work. At least that's the intent. But fortunately, the actors have always been very respectful, and I'm very grateful to them, because without them, the script would be just a script, but with them, it really rises to another level.
And how do you feel about casting now? You're a lot more confident about what you want. I mean, because with Heather in Dollhouse, that was an amazing piece of casting.
Confident, no, but you're always making a leap of faith, whether or not the actor that you choose is experienced or not. You're always making leaps. You have a hunch, and you just have to trust it and hope that it's the right one. Because there is no litmus test. There is no real hard proof that anything's going to work. Nobody knows going into the making of a movie whether or not it's going to succeed at the end. If they knew, then movies would be so much more profitable. But it's always, and they would be so much better. It is very much a mystery, and you have to accept the fact that you really don't quite know as much as you'd like to.
But you must know more now than you did before.
Well, you're always reinventing the wheel, though. You have a certain amount of experience behind you, and you apply that to what you know and to what you're doing. But it's always a different game. It's a different movie. So what may have worked in the last one or the one before that, it's just not going to be applicable in the new projects. Things that are good one of the good things is that you get to work with more experienced crew people. But I tell you, the budgets are still so low, and there's so much stress in getting things done. I think that with time you get to know when the producer says you've got 5 minutes, whether it really means 5 or whether it means 10 or 20 or 30. I mean, it's that kind of, it's just about reading what's really going to matter at the end of the day and what you can give on, which battles are going to really pay off, and which ones you can lose a few men here and you won't lose any sleep.
Well, that's a great answer, because we're out of time, so the perfect way to put it. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
The new movie is storytelling. It's really wonderful. It really is.
Thank you.
Our technical director here in New York is Liz Jennings. In Los Angeles, it's Mario Diaz. This program and previous editions of The Treatment can be heard on the website. Type in KCRW.org or KCRW.com and type in keyword The Treatment. Mary Holdridge produces the program. I'm Elvis Mitchell. Thanks for listening.